Good afternoon. So, the Middle East 1979 is a culmination of events that shape our U.S. foreign policy uh, from 1979 to the present. So, it's a series of events that take place, culminating basically in 9/11, and they are all, of course, events that I've lived through and have kind of shaped my adult life. So, in 1979, I was a freshman in high school, Central Junior High School in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and at that time was not paying attention to anything around the world and how it may affect me in my life. So normally I teach this unit uh, by telling a story of when I was a freshman, and the fact that at the end of the story, none of these events were on my mind at that time. Similar to many American students, you're more focused on your friends, your family, um, your community, not so much about world events. But this is just a cautionary tale of my lifetime and some of the things that took place while I was still in school, high school. So for me, it all begins. I suppose I should let you know this. Some of the learning targets. So have a grasp of these. There's a lot of events. There's a lot of names, a lot of terms that you're going to be required to regurgitate in some form, either a formative or a summative assessment at the end. And this will probably be a 2 or 3 day event with this format where I will go through a material and then um, you'll have an assignment or two that goes along with depending on the topic. So implied task is that you've already completed the Sunni Shia split video lecture that I put together. That's on your it's in your Google Classroom, or it's on your or my slide deck for World Affairs. So if you haven't looked at the Sunni Shia video lecture that I had created, you may want to do that beforehand because that kind of plays into the storyline, gives you the background, some of the background of the tension in the Middle East. All right. So for the first week of this unit, you guys focused on the history and then Israel and Palestine. And this is the other half of the story. Um, and it really revolves around the topic of Islamic fundamentalism. So I'll get into that topic a little bit once I finish this Iranian story. So the Iranian hostage crisis. If you don't know, ask your parents if they remember. Occurred in 1979, lasts for 444 days. And at the time, the United States and Iran had a completely different relationship than what we have today. But the relationship that we have today was molded in 1979. Oil, of course, is one of the key factors for the United States being involved in the Middle East to begin with. For the most part, if it weren't for oil, there's really no national interest for the United States to be involved in that region of the world at all. Matter of fact, it's hot, arid. Uh, there's not a whole lot there. But because of oil, we have been involved in that region for a long period of time. And that was really the background, the backdrop. You see here, oil is a driving catalyst. Um, Oil had been, since it was discovered in large quantities in Saudi Arabia in the 1920s and teens, and oil became a driving force in many economies. It drew more and more power to those of the Middle East, the countries of the Middle East. So, in Iran specifically, this is a predominantly Shia Muslim country. Not that that has anything to do with this story, just the fact that you should know that there's only 3 or 4 predominantly Shia countries in the world, and Iran happens to be one of them. And in 1953, the United States puts in a puppet leader, or assists, the CIA assists in Mohammad Pahlavi becoming the leader of Iran, and is referred to as the Shah of Iran. And as the United States was instrumental in doing in many governments around the world, they put in power or assist getting in power somebody that will have complete control of the people, and in gaining that control with the help of the United States, have an agreement basically with the United States economically, if that makes sense. All right. And he is going to be a very successful leader. However, he's going to be a brutal leader, and he will take down any kind of insurgency or talk of against the government with an iron fist. All right. And in the process, when he's ruling with an iron fist, remember, in the backdrop, many Iranians are thinking to themselves, well, this guy's just being supported by the United States. Sound familiar? Maybe the Israeli conflict or the Israeli conflicts. So anyway, in 1979, the Shah had been in power for decades. However, there had been a rising movement in Iran toward fundamentalist Islam. And all that means is getting back to the basics. They started there, and this is all across the Middle East, not just in Iran, but there was a movement in the 70s and 80s to get rid of Western influence in many of these Muslim countries. And Iran was one of those countries. During the heyday under the Shah, it was a jet setter's paradise, a Western traveler's paradise to go to Tehran or to be part of the Iranian culture because they were very westernized. All right. Now, it's all going to end, and the Shah is going to flee. And over time, there's more and more demonstrations within the country and anti-American demonstrations. Like much of the world, they know that when they protest against the United States, it gets attention in the media and gets world attention. And this is no different. The Shah was sick. There were uprisings within his country. He's losing some power with the military, and he's going to flee. I believe he's sick with cancer. He actually makes his way to the United States. I think he goes to a hospital in New York City. I'm almost positive he gets treated at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester as well. However, during this time, after he's fled, the embassy in Tehran, the capital of Iran, is going to be overrun. Now, any embassy has literally hundreds of American citizens that work, sometimes thousands, depending on the size, that work for the U.S. government in the embassy. The embassy is sovereign United States territory in another foreign country. But these demonstrations gain momentum and become larger and larger. The United States government will start to withdraw the families, American families, from the region that work at the embassy. And eventually it'll kind of whittle it down to a couple of hundred, some military members that are still there, some essential workers that are still there, most of which are shredding papers and getting ready to get out of there because they know it's a matter of time before problems are going to arise, and that's kind of the process. However, not all are going to be out by the time things go south. And for a period of 444 days, there's going to be 52 Americans that are going to be held hostage by the Iranians that were working at the embassy. And here's a little clip. Watch this for a couple minutes. All right, I'll kind of take it from there. Give you a little backdrop. You see here the Ayatollah Khomeini and President Jimmy Carter. Those are two names you're going to have to know. Khomeini, of course, is the Islamic fundamentalist who is in exile, who now can come back to Iran once the Shah has left, and he's kind of the ad hoc leader of the revolution, the Islamic revolution in Iran, which is still basically his today, even though he has since passed on. Let's see. Okay, so there's Khomeini. You need to know him. Islamic fundamentalism. His way of thinking is this rejection of Western culture and influence. President Carter, Jimmy Carter. You probably need to know that name. He's going to be in office at that time. And Carter does his best to try to affect the release of the hostages. He actually plans a super secret mission here called Operation Eagle Claw, which is led by the Delta Force. Now, the Delta Force is a highly secretive military operation in the United States, special force, and they were actually training in the Iranian desert for the rescue attempt of the hostages. They had these large helicopters called Chinooks, that can carry about 30 personnel that were training in the desert, and they were going to use this Delta Force or Operation Eagle Claw to get rid of, or I should say, to save the American hostages. In the process, however, during their training or one of their last training days, there's going to be an accident. A couple of helicopters collide. American Special Forces operators are killed, and they have to scrap the mission. And of course, the Iranians are going to obviously get wind of this operation and what happened, and it's just going to blow up in President Carter's face. Basically, loses all respect internationally, and the Iranians will not do any kind of negotiating with President Carter. So this brings us to the election of 1980. So the 1980 election revolves around a guy by the name of Ronald Reagan. Now, Ronald Reagan is an old movie star, B Western movies. He wasn't an A-lister, but he had made a pretty good living in Hollywood. He had been the governor of California as a conservative Republican, and had made a pretty good name for himself. A very good orator, so he was a very good speaker and patriotic. And he, in his campaigns, he was warning the Iranians that he will use the full force of the United States military to free those hostages if he is elected president. And Carter, he's an ordained minister. The Delta Force fiasco took place. He did an interview in Playboy magazine, which really was not a popular thing for the conservative Christians that followed Jimmy Carter because of his ministry. So he just had a series of misfortunate or unfortunate events. And as you can see on this slide, Ronald Reagan is going to have win a landslide. And within 2 weeks of the inauguration, maybe even within a week of the inauguration of Ronald Reagan, the hostages are going to be released. And that was basically twofold. The purpose of that release was twofold. One was to show Jimmy Carter that they did not respect him. Two was to show Ronald Reagan that they did respect him, and that they felt and they knew that Reagan would use the military and go after them. So they released the hostages. Now, since that time, of course, the Iranians have been creating this Islamic state, basically, the Iranian Republic. And they are led by Ayatollahs. So the Ayatollah, this religious leader, even though he's passed on, the government that is installed is called a theocracy. And that probably should be on your slides, but it's not. A theocracy is literally religious-led government. So Iran is a theocracy. It has a secular leader, a non-religious leader, and a prime minister, but that prime minister basically takes orders from the Ayatollahs. The Council of Ayatollahs really rules that country. All right, and they do follow Sharia law. All right, so some of the takeaways. Ever since 79, the United States and Iran have been not on good speaking terms. The Islamic State and the implementation of Sharia law just means old school fundamentalism for Islam. If you're a Muslim in that country, you are following the Quran. And the law in that country is based from the Quran, so it's religious law. That's Sharia. Iran has been seeking nuclear power. They claim for energy purposes for their citizens, but the U.S. believes for weapons purposes. So under the Obama administration, there was an Iranian nuclear agreement that we had with the United States and other countries and Iran, where they agreed to reduce their weaponizing or their enriching uranium, which would be for nuclear weapons. And it allowed them still to pursue civilian pursuits of nuclear energy, but not military pursuits. And the Trump administration has since torn up that agreement. They felt it was too favorable for the Iranians and not as favorable for the U.S. So they've since tore up that agreement. And since that time, the Iranians have gone back to trying to weaponize their nuclear energy. The other part of this story, to bring it to contemporary terms, is you're all aware of the assassination of Soleimani, who was an Iranian general. Now, Soleimani he trained militias in Iran, and those militias were throughout fighting in Iraq. So it is true that Soleimani was responsible for some American deaths, and that the tactics that he was training or teaching these militias were used against the Americans. It was controversial in the assassination of Soleimani in that rarely do we target a government or a general in this case of a foreign country's government. I mean, we've gone after and eliminated bin Laden, al-Baghdadi. These are leaders of terror organizations. Soleimani is a general for the Iranian army, and was taken out by Americans under President Trump. So that has led to further tensions between the United States and Iran. All right, I'll stop it there and continue with the Soviet-Afghan War tomorrow. Thank you.